大英博物馆，世界上首家国立公共博物馆，创建于1753年的大英博物馆，现如今已经成为世界顶级博物馆之一。这里拥有的800多万件跨越人类历史文明的珍稀藏品，成为吸引世界各地观众慕名而来的重要原因。2013年，大英博物馆的参观人数再次刷新自己的纪录，达到670万人次。作为公立博物馆，大英免费向公众开放。但是大英每年都会推出一些精心策划的大规模付费展览，比如大英现在刚刚推出的维京人展览。1972年，大英博物馆举办的图坦卡蒙宝藏展是大英历史上吸引参观人数最多的展览，多达165万人次。而排位第二的，则是2007年大英推出的以中国为主题的大型特殊付费展览《秦始皇兵马俑》。时隔7年，大英博物馆再次推出以中国为主题的大规模付费展览《明盛世皇朝50年》，通过一系列的展品再现中国明朝的黄金盛世。那么，关于这次展览，策展人和大英有哪些理念？在展览上，观众又将看到哪些明星展品？带着这样的问题，我们特约大英博物馆亚洲部主任施美英女士以及本次展览的2位策展人之一杰西卡·哈里森·霍尔女士独家对话，带您探寻展览背后的故事。Hi, Jessica. Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Come in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having this interview with us. Thank you so much. So, my first question to you about this exhibition is like Ming, 50 years that changed China. How was this idea formalized? How did you get the idea?
Well, I'm working together with Professor Craig Clunas, who's the Professor of the History of Art of Oxford University. And we got together and we wanted to do a fabulous Ming exhibition. And we needed a great story. And so we picked a slice of Chinese history, beginning with the civil war which brought the Yongle Emperor to power, and ending with the capture of the Zhengtong Emperor at the Tumu debacle. And we framed the exhibition around the wonderful material that exists from this period. And we wanted to look at a slice of Chinese history through an intense lens. There'd been many exhibitions in the past, which is the whole of Chinese history or the whole of a dynasty, and we wanted to do something a little bit different with this exhibition.
So at an administrative level, how did the idea of this exhibition come to a final exhibition? What's the process?
For any large exhibition that's going to, even for a small exhibition, we like to have the topic examined by different people in different ways. So one of the first things is that the museum waits till there's a curator with a particular idea. And that idea will be presented first to the department in which that keeper works. And that's a chance for sort of peer review. Other people who work with and know about China, other people who work with and know about different parts of Asia and have experience doing exhibitions will listen to the idea, listen to the curator's presentation, give some feedback. And then the curator will develop a stronger proposal with that feedback. And we'll present that proposal to the museum's director and the museum's committee that looks at exhibition topics. So proposals will be examined in terms of their academic worth and strength. They'll be examined from the perspective of how likely is it that a large public would be interested in the topic. They'll be examined from the perspective of what would be effective fundraising in order to actualize a particular project. So there are many different people that look and weigh in on approving an exhibition topic. Once it's approved, then there have to be several sort of rites of passage. You have to go, you have to do the actual fundraising. You can't actually commit to and publicize an exhibition until you're sure you do have enough financial support for it. So you sort of work for a little while on two tracks. One is hypothetically assuming that it will happen, And so beginning to do research, strengthening the ideas in the proposal, and simultaneously working on the fundraising that will actually bring it to fruition. And then you reach a point where you make a decision and you say, yes, this is going ahead, and then you pull out all the stops, you move ahead, you do all of the research, you begin to bring in your exhibition designers, your interpretation officers, you work as a team to make the content really come alive, really convey the powerful message of what kind of history you're trying to explicate for the public.
You know, Ming Dynasty, they ruled China 276 years in history. So how come that you put your eyes only in that particular 50 years from 1400 to 1450?
Well, I think if you look at the whole of the Ming, it's such a long period of time, and each phase is quite different. But you can look at the period it's really 1403 to 1449. You can look at the period from 1403 as a kind of second founding of the Ming dynasty. The Ming dynasty is actually established by the Hongwu emperor in 1368, but in a way you have a second founding in 1403, and some would argue you have a third founding with the Jiajing emperor in 1522. So there are very distinct phases of the Ming dynasty. Some of the most beautiful things ever made in the Ming dynasty were produced in this early 50-year period. But it's not just about the wonderful things that were made, it's also about a moment in history which is terrifically important. So you have the moment of moving the capital from Nanjing to Beijing at this time, and also the moment of sending the Zhenghe treasure ships around the world. So through recent archaeology, we know more about this period, and through both archaeology on land and on sea, and we really wanted to explore the truth and the myth about this period and what it means for China today.
So what did you find about the myth and the truth?
Well, you'll have to wait for the exhibition to see all of that. But we have been able to redate a number of objects, even in the British Museum's collection, as a result of the research for the project. And we have uncovered objects which have never been publicly shown outside the Far East, which is exciting.
So, as a curator, what's your purpose of this exhibition, and what's the key message that you are keen to make your audience take away from this exhibition?
I want them to go away with the idea of a single family ruling a country the size of a continent. I want them to go away with the idea that it's not just the imperial court, but a series of regional courts. The Hongwu emperor positioned his sons to protect the major rivers and borders of China, and these regional courts we know much more about through recent archaeology. I want them to go away with the idea of Zhenghe, which is a familiar figure in China but is less well known outside, being much earlier than Columbus or Vasco da Gama. And I want them to go away with a sense of a truly multicultural China. There's so many interesting things which happened as a result of this interaction between China and the places that he visited, or the people that went to China. And it's that international engagement that we're particularly focusing on.
And then how will you make this happen? From what kind of curatorial framework and what kind of experts that you can make your wish come true?
Well, we've divided the exhibition itself into 5 very clear sections. We introduce the period in an introduction at the beginning, and then we have a section on courts, a section on military culture, a section on civil culture, a section on belief, and then finally a section on trade and diplomacy. And in this way you move from the inner circles of the court, if you like, to the widest swathes of the oceans on which the Zhenghe ships travelled. I think through the objects that we're borrowing from all over the world and through the intellectual content of the exhibition, I hope that we get across this sort of new history for this period and bring it to life for the widest possible audience. Many people outside China really know very little about this period, and we want to, most of the histories, if you like, of the Ming dynasty tend to focus on the period after the Portuguese arrive in the early 16th century. And this is a much earlier story and actually much more important in the overall scheme of the Ming dynasty.
So from your explanation, I got the feel that this exhibition is trying to get away from the Europe-centric perspective of view. So do you agree with that?
Yes, I think it obviously it will be entertaining and very beautiful, but I think it also has a message for people to learn and take away, and that is that this wonderful era of exploration is considerably earlier than Christopher Columbus in 1492. And I think that there's been a lot of interesting research from the later period, and there's much more to do, but I think this is the first time anybody has looked at this earlier period through this kind of lens.
So I want to know, how much time did you spend to put this exhibition together?
Well, Craig Clunas and I have been working together for about 4 years on this exhibition, and we had sponsorship for the exhibition from BP, and we've had sponsorship for the research from the UK government, which is the Arts and Humanities Research Council, the highest research council granting body in the UK. So we've been able to work with other scholars from around the world to produce a book that will go with the exhibition, but also to engage with scholars of music, scholars of food, scholars of costume, scholars who work on the relationships between China and Korea or Iran or Japan or Vietnam. And it's by bringing all this knowledge together that we're creating, I hope we're creating something new and quite special.
So let's just talk about the exhibits. Then I want to know, do you have a total figure of the exhibits that we have in that exhibition?
We have 280 objects in the exhibition, which is a very large exhibition.
Then what's the size of your selection pool to make the 280?
Well, we have borrowed from 31 different museums across the world, and about a third of the objects come from the British Museum.
Then what's your selection criteria to put which object into the exhibition?
That's very interesting, actually. We're both very tough on objects. They have to be visually interesting, but also tell an important part of the history. And so every object in that exhibition has gained its place, like passed a series of tests in order to get in.
Who are in the judging panel?
Well, the selection of objects has been Craig and myself, but we have worked with the different museums that we are borrowing from. So, for example, I was in China in November, and we were looking at a selection of materials, some of which were choices, and we were able to narrow some of our choices down by talking to the curators and engaging with the people whose objects they are.
Then, as a curator, which object is that you are most proud of?
That's very difficult. I think that it's difficult to single out any loans, but I would say that some of the let me pick one object from the British Museum first, and I would say that for me that would be the painting of the Forbidden City, because we've had it in our collection for over 140 years, but we've had it specially restored for the exhibition. So now, because it's been beautifully restored in collaboration with a conservator who was formerly at the Shanghai Museum. She's been here for 20 years, and she's a great scholar of restoration. They have now cleaned the painting so that you can read the signs that are above each of the building. So Wu Men, for example, appears right in the middle of the painting. And I would say that that would be one of the stars for me from the British Museum's collection.
And I know this exhibition consists of a wide variety of different types of exhibits. Could you talk a bit more about the different types of the exhibits?
Yes, I mean, I think that's one of the most exciting things about the exhibition, actually. We have fabulous paintings and porcelain, which is what most British people think of. When they think of Ming, they think of Ming vases. But we also have gold vessels, silver vessels, men and women's jewellery, costume, sculpture, bronzes, textiles, extraordinary lacquer, a real range of objects.
So then, as you mentioned just now, that in this preparing process that you had a lot of new discoveries, like you for example, redate some of the exhibits that you have.
Yes.
So what's the major new discoveries?
Well, there are so many that are very interesting, but we have a particular painting that has, on further inspection, has seals which belong to a particular early Ming general, and the painting itself had been dated much later, to the 15th, 16th century, but these seals of ownership tell us that the painting was made much earlier.
So then I want to know, exhibitions of this large scale, what's your financing mechanism?
Well, for the British Museum itself, that's paid for predominantly by the British government, but for our programmes like exhibitions, we have independent sponsorship for that.
This exhibition is also a special exhibition that visitors need to pay to view this exhibition, isn't it?
That's right, because unfortunately the cost of borrowing from so many Far Eastern museums is very expensive. You think of the fuel prices on the aeroplanes, and that makes it quite costly to organise something like this.
All large-scale exhibitions at the British Museum involve looking for corporate sponsorship. International exhibitions are very expensive because, as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of time that has to go into the research with a lot of international travel. Then there's a huge amount of time and effort that goes into actually packing the objects and packing them up to the specification that nothing could happen that would harm them. The shipping, the couriering, these are very expensive costs. And when you're creating a kind of blockbuster exhibition, you need to have excellent design. You have to have everything look good in a way that's easily understandable and accessible to the public. You need to have expert lighting. You need to involve lots of different people to make a large exhibition work. You have a lot of people doing interpretation. You have to write and print a catalog. So for these expensive projects, the British Museum will work with corporate sponsors.
I know in 2007, British Museum held the Terracotta Army exhibition, which is really a blockbuster in your history. 850,000 visitors come to see that exhibition. So compared to your experience 7 years ago, what's the difference, major difference between that one and this Ming 50 years that changed China exhibition in terms of organizing process or financing mechanism, all aspects?
And similarities have to do with the fact that an important part of the British Museum's mission is to create a situation in which the public will have a chance to see fabulous objects from China and see them in a context where they're explained in a way that people who have no prior knowledge of China can be learning much that's new about China, and explained in a context in a way that those people who are already familiar with China can actually still learn something new, can see something new. So the basic premise is the same. We want to share our understanding of Chinese culture with a very large international public. And there are similarities in that for both exhibitions, we work with the best experts and we create international teams. So it's scholarship that's rooted here in Britain, here in the British Museum, but it's also working with scholars in China, working with scholars in Europe, America, throughout the world. So we create very broad, deep teams in order to explain our themes. Some of the practical differences are the first Emperor exhibition was actually on view for 6 months. And that was an unusual length of time. And it had to do partially with the fact that it was such a popular exhibition. It was also the first time that we had used an exhibition space at the British Museum called the Round Reading Room. It used to be a library space that was especially turned into an exhibition space. And it was wonderful to be able to bring together for the public both the first time the British Museum had used a new exhibition space and a fabulous topic from China. Interestingly enough, that's being repeated again with the Ming show is going into a new space at the British Museum. It will be in the inaugural year of a new wing that opened for having large-scale exhibitions. So there are a lot of similarities. Differences come down to the fact that with the Ming exhibition, we've decided that we want to have many different lenders from China, as well as other museums in the world. And so we're working with Art Exhibition China, a dedicated agency that is part of the Chinese government that facilitates loans when you have multiple museum partners in China. It was a different situation with the first emperor, where everything was coming from one cultural municipality. Everything was from the region around Xi'an. Things were coming from the first emperor whole complex of museums and on-site museum, so that we were dealing then directly with one municipal authority. And here we're dealing with multiple museums through the unifier of Arts Exhibition China.
How will you persuade Chinese audience to come and see this exhibition? And you know, we don't have the pay tradition in China when we visit museums. So how can you persuade them to pay for 160 yuan for this exhibition?
Well, I think of it like going to the cinema. It is a form of entertainment, but the content will stay with you for much longer. I think to be able to see all these exhibits together in one place is a one-off opportunity, because the exhibition's not going to travel. It's just going to be a one moment when you'll be able to see these. If you wanted even to see the Chinese exhibits on their own, you would have to get in a plane and hop round China, and it would take you many weeks. And this exhibition will bring those objects together with American loans, European loans and UK loans in a kind of one-off moment. And I hope that people will feel that that is worth the price of a cinema ticket, and it's much less expensive than going to see a football match, for example.
What we're genuinely believing is that, first of all, this will be the one and only time in all of history that these particular objects will ever be in one place at one time. So there's no other time to see them together. Now, why is it worth paying to see these objects together? Because if you think about it, you have a team of specialists who have been poring over everything that exists that was made in China between the years 1400 and 1450. And these are the objects that they have selected as being the most exciting and representative of telling us about this dynamic period in Chinese history. No individual, doesn't matter if you're born in China and you lived your life in China, no individual will have spent their lifetime thinking what are the most important objects to tell the story of 1400 to 1450. You can come here, you can pay, and you can get all of that work done for you, presented for you in a really visually exciting way, and all of the research, all right there for you. That's why museums exist.
Apart from those two special exhibitions that we mentioned just now, British Museum, particular Asia department, also work a lot with Chinese, contemporary Chinese artists or modern Chinese artists to do paintings and sculptures, etc. Could you talk more about other involvement with China, engagement from Asia department?
We do work with contemporary artists. We collect modern and contemporary. And we also do exhibitions. We did a special exhibition a couple years ago on Xu Bing, where we did a background story installation, and we prepared a special website showing him and his team at work creating this installation. We partially chose Xu Bing because back in the 1980s we had collected a book from heaven. So we've been very active in collecting contemporary print artists. And then many of these artists have gone on to be installation artists. So Xu Bing was a perfect way to engage with a sort of change within artistic culture in China itself. We've also engaged with the sculptor Jian Wang, who creates the wonderful stainless steel rocks. And during the time that we exhibited the First Emperor exhibition, which of course is at a very early moment in Chinese history, we thought it would be particularly nice for the public to also be engaged with contemporary China. So we had a small loan exhibition with an absolutely gigantic sculpture by Jian Wang that we put on view in the Great Court, so that people walked in on their way to the ancient exhibition about China. They were confronted with modern China. We then went and collected a smaller, much smaller size work by Jian Wang for the permanent collection. And now, having that connection with him, we have embraced a new program that we're working on with the China Art Foundation, and it's to explore the interactions between contemporary Chinese artists and contemporary Western artists. We're trying to explore the attitude that artists themselves have towards the concept of global art. Is there such a thing as global art? How much is an artist's individual background shaping what they do, and how much of it is that they're traveling internationally, they're thinking internationally. So we decided to bring together two artists, two sculptors, both of whom are represented in our collection. And one is David Nash, the UK sculptor and installation artist, and one is Jian Wang. We're going to have them speak in a conversation together. It's on stage. The public will be there. We'll have simultaneous translation to make it available. And we're going to have David Nash talk about what has he seen and thought about and felt from China that may have influenced some of his approach to sculpture and natural objects. And we'll be talking to Jian Wang and finding out from him what has he seen and absorbed from Western traditions, and see if by bringing together a Western artist and a Chinese artist, we can also create a program that has a different kind of audience. What you find often is if people love Chinese art, they go to a talk by a Chinese artist. If they love Western sculpture, they go to a talk by a Western sculptor. How do we get these two audiences to cross over? This is a program where we're actually trying to explore and to show people that whatever it is that you think you feel most comfortable with or are most interested in, actually, you should expand your mind, you should relax, you should look cross-culturally. So that's how we've come up with this new program, of which David Nash and Jian Wang are the first installation in.
And it is said that only a tip of the iceberg of Chinese collection is on display in British Museum now. So is it true?
Yes, it's a large tip of the iceberg, but it is only the tip of the iceberg. We have very large collections, and these research collections are rotated on and off view. So we create a permanent gallery that has certain kinds of themes we want to talk about. We want to talk about ancient bronzes, we want to talk about jade through the ages, we want to talk about later imperial arts and lacquer. But we will rotate those objects in the display cases in order to refresh them. Sometimes objects actually, lacquer, for instance, you don't want to leave on permanent view. You want to be sensitive to how much exposure it has. So we rotate our holdings. We also like to update our scholarship. As more is known about lacquer, we would want to be able to write new labels. So we have rotations like that. We also have a large number of prints, paintings, textiles, organic materials that cannot be left on permanent view. So every few years we do a special exhibition drawing from our own research permanent collections, and we put that on view. So that keeps a momentum and a shift. And we have an exhibition opening in April on selections of our famous Chinese paintings. We also have a very important early Chinese painting from the 5th, 6th century, the admonitions of the instructors to the court ladies, the Nushirjentu scroll. And that is so fragile, being so old, it can only be on view for a few weeks every year. But we're preparing a new gallery for displaying it for those 6 weeks, and that will open in June.
According to your experience working together with the Chinese museums, I know in 2011 there were 390 new museums coming to being, but still if we calculate the museum per capita, China still lags behind. So apart from the quantity, if we look at the quality, what do you think, what aspects that we should improve?
Well, I think, and I'm speaking honestly, I think it's at the point now in China where it's both ways. China has things to learn from Western museums, from the British Museum that have very long histories. But there are things that we can learn from Chinese museums now. Because what China has, which is a great advantage, is everything is starting new, which means that Chinese museums can use the best and newest technology. They can put in the best of everything to modern standards. And with that, we can learn lessons from China as well. But one of the things that we like to do at the British Museum is we have a program for 6 weeks every summer where we invite young museum professionals from foreign countries to come and see how the British Museum works. This has been going on since 2006, and we usually have 2 people a year from China who come and study all of our processes. So everything from how we catalog and register objects, how we take our records and we put them online, to what are our procedures in terms of curators caring for collections and interacting with conservators, to learning what do we do with departments such as marketing. How do we publicize and get a wider public interested in our museum exhibitions and programs? They get exposure to how we run our educational programs. What do we do to specialize with children? What do we do to specialize with getting into school curriculums? What do we do for adult education? And we also are very interested in developing larger training programs that if Chinese museums want to work with us and partner for a more systematic view of training of what have we learned in our 250 years of experience, we're always ready to share that. I think I see a lot of quality in Chinese museums. Sometimes what you see is a little bit of a rush. Everything's new, everything has a deadline. How do you deal with the sort of rush factor of get it out now and make sure that you're doing it slowly, carefully, with enough process? But I think China's got great solutions going on. It's a very dynamic museum culture. But there are many things that exist in the West that aren't as embedded in Chinese society, and China will have to decide if they're necessary. But there are all kinds of vetting procedures. If you're creating private museums, how do you ensure that the private museums reach a certain standard? These are things where we have in Britain what's called a charity commission, which examines institutions and their bylaws and their collections and regulates them with a sort of relaxed view. You don't need too much control, but you need a system what we call vetting. And I think some of those systems are starting in China, and perhaps China can study from the West and then adapt that system to fit the individual situation of China.
And previously, British Museum had some exhibitions in China. So I was wondering, do you have any further plan in the future to bring more exhibition into China? And usually, how do you collaborate with Chinese organizations to making exhibition in China?
We're very happy to send exhibitions to China. We've had a lot of success with that. Most often the exhibitions we send are not about Chinese art or culture. We've been sending exhibitions about Greek and Roman art, about British art, all different topics. We're hoping, in fact, in the future to send an exhibition on Egyptian art to China. But we did also do one exhibition where we sent Chinese porcelain and Chinese porcelain that was made for the export market. So that kind of porcelain that has both Chinese porcelain itself but Western decoration. We created an exhibition with the Victoria and Albert and sent that to the National Museum in China. So there's a whole range of topics. It's a very active kind of exhibition market, and we work with China as we do with any international partners. What we do is we prepare lists of what exhibitions we have available, and we take those to various museums in China, and we ask if they're interested in hosting one of our exhibitions. And it's hosting in the way that all museums are exchanging exhibitions around the world. There are certain costs and fees that have to be met, but it's working together to make sure that the museum receiving an exhibition feels that the topic suits their public, their visitors. And so we'd love to have British Museum Egyptian art and cultural artifacts travel to China.